like to welcome the Lord Mayor, Belfast, Alderman Brian Kingston, our guest speaker, Tim Philpot, many special guests, and every lady and gentleman here, and in particular, also those who might be here for the first time. I guess there's quite a few in a room this size who are here for the first time. Thank you also to the hosts who have invited you and done quite a lot of organisation, I would imagine, to make sure that everything works, to make sure the information is disseminated, to have you here on time and know the detail. You may be asking, if you're quite new to CBMC, what is CBMC? That's a reasonable question. I've been musing on that again over the last few weeks as this morning approaches, and two words have stuck in my mind. The two words are chaos and dysfunctionality, but that's not because they describe CBMC, I hope. Those have just been words that have occurred to me as I, like you, watch the economies around the world, the politics around the world, as I observe businesses and organisations that I work in and among and for. Family life can be so chaotic. We try our best. And sadly, we all know the reality that we can also have internal chaos and dysfunctionality. And CBMC, it's in my heart that CBMC exists as a message of hope, that into that chaos and dysfunctionality of the world and of personal life and the organisations that we're part of, our message is this: that God sent Jesus Christ not as a temporary fix, not as the patch, but as a permanent solution. We want to share that with you this morning over the next hour or so. It's now my pleasure to introduce Tim Philpot, who is our guest speaker this morning. This year marks about 20 years of Tim coming to Belfast as a friend and as a golfer, and some would say that it's the highest esteem that he holds the links of Ireland in that brings him here. But we know, Tim, that there are other reasons, and we're grateful for all of the things that bring you here and for the friendships that have built over 20 years. Tim was a practicing lawyer. He has been a senator in Kentucky. He's an author of a super book, Irretrievably Broken, speaking into that whole idea of chaos and dysfunctionality. For 7 years, he was international president of CBMC, helping CBMC build across those 95 countries that the Lord Mayor mentioned. He goes back with a few rounds of golf under his belt, but before he does that, Tim will speak to us this morning. Great to have you. Thank you, Tim.
Mr. Lord Mayor, thank you for the invitation. Thanks to everybody. I hope you can understand me. I'm from Kentucky, and we're famous. We think we're famous for our horses in Kentucky. I have many Irish friends who now live in Kentucky because of the horse business. But I have unfortunately discovered that we're more famous for chickens than horses. So I hope that you've enjoyed the Kentucky Fried Chicken. I did say something 2 days ago, which I never thought I would say in Ireland, and I have been here about 15 times to Northern Ireland to play Royal County Down in Portrush and Ballyliffin and lots of other places. In fact, I got a little sunburn yesterday at Port Stewart. But on Monday, we were playing golf at Malone, and I told the guys that I'm going to say something I didn't think I would ever say in Belfast. Does anybody have any sun cream? And I forgot to put it on yesterday, so here we are. The people of Northern Ireland are very special to me for lots of reasons. I've been playing golf here for a long time, have many golf buddies. But on 9/11, 2001, I was in Arizona with some golfers, and we had a competition between 12 men from Northern Ireland and 12 Americans. We had 24 men there, just playing golf in Arizona, when 9/11 happened. We were on the golf course when it happened. And so we ended up spending a whole week together because nobody could leave. And I learned a lot about terrorism that week. My friends in Northern Ireland told me they'd been living with a lot of the things that we were going to have to learn to live with in the days to come. And I began to understand that the world is at war. My wife, as an example, grew up in Africa. She actually grew up in the Congo, Belgian Congo, and most people are unaware that about 10 to 15 years ago, 4 million people died in a war in the Congo. I've been to India a lot, and India and Pakistan is on the edge of war just about every day. China, North Korea, everybody on the edge of war just about every day. And then I've traveled quite a bit throughout Latin America, and actually the most violent country in the world is Colombia. And you ask the people there, why is there so much violence in this country, and nobody can really give a good explanation. And then, just as I thought I was probably safe at home, in Kentucky, a place of green grass and white fences and horses, and it just seems like heaven sometimes. I got appointed about 14 years ago now to be a judge in family court. Now, there's an oxymoron for you. Family. Psalm 68:6 says that God puts the lonely in families. So our biggest problem as human beings is probably that we are lonely, and God's answer for our loneliness was that He created this thing called the family. But families are so messed up that at least in Kentucky we have a special court with special judges for family court. An oxymoron. Sort of like I was watching a dog show not long ago on television, and the announcer said, "This is a magnificent Chihuahua." I went, "I don't think so." A magnificent Chihuahua. So, I now live in a world of domestic violence, neglect and abuse of children. I do a thing called drug court as well. And, of course, just good old-fashioned divorce. And, of course, most people are unaware that about 80 or 90% of the people that are in family court are not married anymore. So marriage has died, virtually died. That is what my book is all about, by the way. You can get it on Amazon. Didn't bring enough copies with me to sell this morning. But if you want to go on Amazon, you can find Judge Z, Irretrievably Broken. Lord Mayor, here you go. This is your copy. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
The rest of you will have to buy a copy. I was trying to write a scholarly work on what is marriage, and I couldn't do it because I'm not very smart. And so I turned it into a novel about family court and trying to explain some things about marriage, divorce, and love. I think you might enjoy it. But this, just as the world is at war, what I have discovered in the last 14 years is that families are also at war. And even worse than that, the bottom line is that I think internally almost every human being is at war inside himself or herself. There's a good person and a bad person living in almost everybody. I will say everybody, in fact. Now, I know this is a prayer breakfast, and I understand that at these type of events, these civic kind of events, somebody like me gets invited to speak. I have a background in politics since I was a senator for 8 years. Even being a judge is an elected position in our city. I'm not sure how you do it in Belfast, but I have to run for election to be a family court judge. Luckily, nobody wants my job, usually. So I ran unopposed last time. But then I was a full-time president of CBMC, a Christian organization. So when I'm invited to speak someplace, everybody expects me to go, well, now the answer to all this war in the world, the answer to the problems is simple. You need to get more involved in politics, and you need to get more involved in your religious institutions. There's a problem with that theory, though. As far as I can tell, all these wars are caused by politics and religion. So I'm not here to declare to you that being more political and more religious is going to solve anything. I've got another answer, if you'll listen. I'm here today not as a judge. I'm here today not as a defense attorney for God. I'm not here as a prosecutor of the devil. I'm just here today as a witness. I go to court literally every single day of my life. Monday through Friday, every day. I've got a black robe on. No wig. You still do the wig here, right? I don't get the privilege of wearing a wig. I've got enough hair as it is. But I put a black robe on. But today I'm not a judge. I'm just a witness. And I always swear the witnesses in. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? And so today I'm swearing myself in. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. I'm just a witness today. And so let me tell you just a little bit of my story. My story really starts in 1940. That's when my mother and father met and got married. My father was a terrible alcoholic. He was from down in the mountains of Kentucky. He's what we call a hillbilly. I don't know what you call somebody from the mountains, but my dad was a hillbilly. And he drank too much. In 1942, he got drunk, signed up for the Marines, because he was tired of them telling him what to do at work. So he ended up in the Marines in the South Pacific for 3.5 years. He and my mother didn't even see each other, and during the time that he was off in the Marines, my mother started to attend a little Methodist church, and she found God. So when my dad came back from the war, he discovered a woman that was quite different than the one he had left behind 3.5 years before, and he began to drink even more. Became quite abusive. But the bottom line is that in 1947, after two horrible years of their marriage, when my mother should have left my father, in fact, I have the letter that she wrote to her sister explaining why she was not going to leave him. And even though I wasn't born until 1951, 4 years later, one of the reasons that she didn't leave my father is that she saw that good person that was living inside of my dad, and she had a dream, and her dream, to some degree, maybe to a large degree, was me. Was me. She saw the possibility that if my dad could change, they could have children. And so sure enough, my dad also quit drinking in 1947, met God in 1947, which made my life possible. And I was born in 1951. My parents were both 37 years old, had been told they would never have any children. And along came Timmy. That's me. And so I grew up in a home where my parents were constantly talking about the fact that Timmy is a miracle. He's not supposed to be here. We can't wait to find out what happens to little Timmy someday. We think God has a special plan for Timmy. Well, it turns out, though, I wasn't all that special. I was a very ordinary student, even a subordinary student. I'm not sure how you grade in Northern Ireland, but back home, if you make all A's, you're a 4.0 student. If you make B's, it's 3.0. Well, I was a 2.9 student, meaning I was below average in every way. My parents actually sent me off to a special school when I was 14 years old because I was so much trouble. But despite the fact that I was so ordinary in every way, I still had this ringing in my ears that my mom and dad said that I was special. And they couldn't wait to find out what God's plan for my life might end up to be. Well, part of this story took quite a turn. In 1970, I was 19 years old. I was a freshman at the university. My mother was so happy that I had graduated from high school that she gave me her car. It was a gold 1965 Mustang convertible. And boy, did I look good in that car. or at least I thought so. And I had a girlfriend in the car on a cold January night, driving way too fast, hit a slick spot, went down over about a 30-foot embankment, no seat belts. You know how that goes. For about 5 seconds, I was completely sure I was dead. And I thought, wow, this is tragic. I'm going to die young. And it seemed like forever, but sure enough, I woke up and I was not even injured at all. Somehow angels had protected that car. The girl in the car with me was safe as well. We had survived this horrific accident. The car was totaled. I lost my Mustang. But that was actually maybe the most important day of my life, because it woke me up to the reality that I was not going to live forever. And even though I had a 2.9 GPA, was a very ordinary student, I was not a fool, because I began to ask the question, where will I be 100 years from now? And that's the day that I started my search. Where will I be 100 years from now? You know, I live my life among important people, people like you, business and professional people. And business and professional people, what do? We plan our life out. We plan where we're going to work. We plan quite often the same kind of things for our family, our children, who we will marry, where our children should go to school. We then begin to plan our financial retirement. I turned 66 this year, so I'm almost there. Will you go to Florida? For us, it's Florida or Arizona or California. For you, what is it? Portugal or I don't know Spain? What do you do? I'm coming to Scotland and Ireland. I love your golf courses so much. But smart people plan where they're going to be when they're 66 years old. They plan where they're going to be when they're 76 years old. But for people that do not plan where they're going to be 100 years from now, the Bible actually has a name for people like that. It says you're a fool. It doesn't matter how smart you are, if you're not planning eternity, you're a fool. And I began, even though I was a very subordinary student, I knew when I was 19 years old, I better figure this thing out. What would have happened to me if I had died in this crash? And I did. And I'm here to report to you that 2 weeks after my car wreck, I received eternal life. And I want to just give you a little information about how my journey started. What was it I learned way back in 1970 that is still true today in the year 2017? The first thing is you have to tell the truth about yourself. You have to tell. The Bible, of course, says that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. The bottom line is nobody's good enough for heaven. My first trip to Scotland to play golf was in 1983. I qualified for the British Amateur, and I was there to play at Turnberry in Scotland. And I got there a week early, 10 days early. Found myself at Gullen, which is the little village where Muirfield sits. And I got there and there were no caddies that day, but there was a little boy on the putting green named Douglas, and so I took him as my caddy, and I had this big bag. The bag was actually bigger than Douglas, my little caddy. And he was struggling so much, we got to the second green, which is straight up a hill. And little Douglas, I thought I had killed this little boy. I said, "Douglas, are you okay?" And he went, "Fine, sir. Everything is fine." So all during the day I said, "Are you okay?" And every time, "Fine, sir. Everything is fine." Well, I realized when I got home, I had a picture of Douglas. And I realized he was just like every single person I know back home, the business and professional people I know especially. You say, "How you doing?" "Fine." This morning already you told somebody you're fine, right? "How you doing, Lord Mayor?" "Fine." The truth is, most of us are not fine. The truth is, most of us are living with pressures that nobody knows about, but we walk around all day acting like everything is fine. We're on the edge of bankruptcy quite often. Our marriage is terrible quite often. Our children are doing terrible quite often. But everybody you see, all during this day today, you will say, "How you doing?" And you will be telling everybody, "Oh, I'm doing just fine." Well, the first step to salvation is to admit that you're not fine, to admit that something's not right. And of course, what we do in the business and professional world, we dress up to cover up. Look at me today. This is as good as I can do. I got my blue blazer on. I got my red and blue tie on. I went to a seminar that taught me how to dress for a closing argument in court. You want to wear a blue and red tie. The stripes, by the way, is a symbol of strength. The red is exciting and the blue is trustworthy. So all these kind of things. I'm looking around. The orange tie, man, is not a good look, by the way. Be careful of this guy right here. Something ain't right. But if there's somebody with a blue and red tie on, he's probably a politician, so beware of that too. Or a lawyer. But the real you's got to stand up, and the real you is not good enough for heaven. Nobody is. I got to meet Mother Teresa twice in my life on trips to India. The last time I was with her, I was a senator, so she gave me a few extra minutes. And I was sitting with her. I have a picture at home. I was telling her how good she is and thanking her for all the good that she has done in the world. And she leaned over, tapped me on the elbow, which was her way of telling me to shut up. And she said words that I will never forget, even though it was 20 years ago. She says, "I'm not good." She turned her eyes to heaven. And so I thought, wow, I'm a lawyer. I'm a politician. And Mother Teresa says she's not good. What does this mean? And so we start with the truth that none of us is good enough for heaven. Secondly, you do have to understand just a little bit about God. Almost nothing, actually, but you got to understand a little bit, and that is God is like a coin with two sides. On one side of the coin, He's a God of justice. As a judge, I understand this very well. He will by no means let the guilty go unpunished. When somebody has committed crimes, it's my duty as the judge to enforce the law. You would not think well of me if I did not do that. And that sense of justice that's inside of you comes from God. But on the other side of the coin, God is also a God of mercy and love. And He does not desire that anybody should perish. It's not His idea to punish any person. And so there seems to be a dilemma here for God Almighty Himself. And I don't want to get too deep into theology at all because I don't understand much. But you've got to understand a little bit about God. He's a God of both justice and mercy. So there is a dilemma in my mind anyway for God Himself. And how did God resolve that dilemma? He did it with one word. And it's a word that also was given to me by Mother Teresa. When she said, "I'm not good," and turned her eyes toward heaven, she said one word, and she said it so softly that I could barely hear her, even though I was sitting 3 feet away. She said, "Jesus." Now, who was Jesus? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Jesus was God in the flesh who came to earth. And what did He do? He came to pay the penalty for you and me. His death on the cross was covering the sin, my sin, covering the penalty for me. It's unthinkable in court. In my courtroom, it's unthinkable that I would allow somebody else to pay the penalty for the criminal. But God's love for us was so great that essentially He said, "Yes, you're guilty, but I'm going to come to earth in the form of a man. And I'm going to die on a cross to pay the penalty for your sins." A few years ago, I used to do a lot of jury trials. And on a Monday morning, I was starting a jury trial, and we had picked a jury. I always thought that was fun, picking the jury, trying to figure out who might help you. And we picked the jury on a Monday morning, and it happened to be the Monday after Easter. I went into a little delicatessen to buy a sandwich for lunch very quickly. I was thinking about nothing but the trial. A little Jewish lady behind the counter, though, when I got up to get my sandwich, she knew me well. She said, "Tim, you're religious. Nobody can answer this question for me. Maybe you can answer it. Why do they call it Good Friday?" Well, I just wanted a ham sandwich. This lady was interested in a theological discussion. I just wanted a sandwich. And I remember saying to her very quickly, Vinny, you think I'm somebody I'm not. You think I'm religious. The truth is, I am a sinner, deserving of nothing. But God loved me so much that He sent His Son, Jesus Christ, to this earth to die on a cross for my sins. And so it actually was a very bad Friday for Jesus. But it was a good Friday for me. Hold the mayonnaise. And you may say this morning, well, wait a minute, can it be that simple? I want to say to you that it can be that simple. Now, it gets more complicated when we start growing seminaries and we start trying to complicate things with lots of complicated books, and it becomes much deeper than that. But is it really that simple? That Jesus Christ died on the cross for you and me, and it was a bad Friday for Him, but a good Friday for me, and He rose from the dead on that Sunday morning. Is that possible? Yes, it is. Do you know that there was a testimony to Jesus Christ on the front page of the newspaper this morning in Belfast? Did you know that that same testimony was on the front page of the Tokyo Times and the New York Times and the Sydney newspaper and the Beijing newspaper and even in Tehran and Beirut and Baghdad? May the 3rd, 2017 means a baby was born in Bethlehem. All of time has been measured by this one life, Jesus Christ. And so, whether you choose to believe or not is always going to be our choice, your choice. But to ignore this person that all of time is measured by can only be described. To ignore that is to be a fool, I think. Jesus Christ was God. Now, how do we appropriate this for ourselves? And I hope I'm not taking too long. I don't have a watch. Are we okay? A few minutes? We're good. Well, I want to leave you with a couple of words that are very important words before we leave this morning. How do you actually receive this for yourself? The first word I believe is really important is the word trust. The bottom line is, who do you trust? You want to get to heaven, I understand, but how do you get there? Or do you trust yourself? That doesn't seem very smart. I went to look for the bathroom just a minute ago and had difficulty finding the bathroom, let alone heaven. So I don't trust myself. Do you trust politicians to have all the answers for your eternal salvation? Are you serious? I went around last year in the United States. I spent the whole year saying this repeatedly. I finally run out of people to vote for. It's finally happened. It's finally happened in the year 2016. I have nobody left that I can vote for. And I think it's a good thing. We had an election in America between Nebuchadnezzar and Jezebel. Now, you have to be a little bit religious to understand what I just said. And there must be some religion in the room because you laughed. But there's some truth to that. It was not an election of godly people. That's what happens with politicians. And I was one, I can say that. And politicians always have the same speech. I know because I've given it. Follow me, do it my way and my party, and things will get better. Later. It's always later. Nobody ever promises help like right now. And even when they get elected to office, they say, well, you need to wait. You need to be patient. But guess what Jesus said is so much better. He said the kingdom of heaven is near. What that means is, and I'm not kidding on this one, your life can change today. May 3rd, 2017 can be your day. Everything can change. And the second word I want to leave with you is follow. Who will you follow? Jesus kept it simple. He said, follow me. I think He kept it simple because He knew there would be people like me, 2.9 GPAs. He knew not everybody would be a genius. But it's not just simple, it's also radical. Follow Jesus? That means I'm not in control of my life anymore? Many people are near Jesus, but they're not really following Jesus. In fact, they're asking Jesus to follow them. They got Jesus in their back pocket. Hey, Jesus, I may need you. Hang in there with me. I'll let you know when I need you. I'm doing just fine without you right now. But just being near Jesus is not enough. Following Him. This is all about following Him, and it's scary because He may take you to the ends of the earth. Even worse, He may tell you to go home at night. He may tell you to stay home. This Jesus is radical when He says, follow me. And so 2 questions. Will you trust me? Will you follow me? I said yes to both of those questions. And my life has never been the same. But now at age 66, I'm learning one last question. I said yes to following Jesus. I said yes to trusting Him. But here at the end of my life, and maybe I don't look too old, but I am 66. And I'm feeling like I'm at the end of my life. I'm not sure how much time I've got left. I have a grandfather that made it to 104, so I got my fingers crossed. But you never know. The last question that God is asking me is the one that I'm asking in my book. God has been asking me, hey, Tim, will you marry me? What? Will you marry me? I've begun to learn that the Bible is one big love story from Genesis to Revelation. The wedding supper of the Lamb in Revelation. Genesis, of course, all about the wedding, the original wedding. They asked John the Baptist, are you the Messiah? And John the Baptist says, no, I'm not the Messiah. I'm just the best man at a wedding. Jesus performed His first miracle at a wedding in Cana of Galilee. And shortly thereafter, John the Baptist began to describe himself as just the best man at a wedding. And Jesus is not just somebody that died for you. Jesus is somebody that's here to be your lover. That's very difficult for men to understand. The Bible says He wants to be our husband. The men are all looking at me right now funny. I got a few smiles from the women. But this is a very difficult concept for us men because we have trouble with the love. And so it's a much better concept, though, of God, because if you see God as your judge, He can set you free because of the death of Jesus on the cross. But let me tell you what a judge always does at the end of having mercy on you. The judge always ends up going, you're free to go. You need to get out of here. We're not going to have any personal relationship. You're free, but you need to leave. And so you have no relationship at all with this God who's like a judge. A far better way is to look at God as your Father, because love enters the picture, family enters the picture. But even better than the idea of God as your Father is the idea of God as your lover. And I'm beginning finally to get in touch with that part of Him who wants to be the love of my life. I picked up on this. I started this little journey about 5 years ago, which is really what led to me writing this book. It's the only story in my book that is true. You'll see a story in there, Mr. Lord Mayor, that the judge in the book goes to India on a little trip. He goes on to a wedding. And I boycotted weddings for about 15 or 20 years because I've always hated weddings. I don't know if all men hate weddings, but I certainly have always hated them for some reason. For one thing, they're on Saturday when I'd rather play golf. I don't know why people plan weddings on Saturdays when there's a nice golf course out there someplace. And I cry at weddings. I don't like to cry. But so I boycotted weddings, but when I got in family court and I realized that marriage was dying, I said, I need to start going to weddings again. So I ended up at a wedding in India. It was an arranged marriage, quite different than ours. And after the wedding was concluded, they asked me to go to a small, rural country church with about 50 people there. The people there were destitute and poor. There were some little boys who were HIV positive from a little home there. There were 8 women who were called destitute women from a little home there. And they had nothing. some village people there. I stood to speak with an interpreter. After I'd been talking for just a few minutes, one of the ladies came forward, put her little shawl up over her head, which was her sign to me that she wanted me to pray for her. I thought, ma'am, you think I'm a preacher or a pastor, a man of God? I feel so out of place. I'm not worthy to pray for you. But I basically had to stop the whole service and just went to the back and laid my hands on one lady's head to pray for her. The interpreter got distracted and went away with the children. And when she did, I was left there alone with these women who had nothing. Nothing. HIV positive. 2 or 3 of them were blind. They'd been pulled off the streets of India and had nothing except Jesus. They had nothing. They had no titles. Nobody said, "Hey, Judge, how you doing?" Nobody said, "Good morning, Senator." "Mr. President, how are you?" These were not people of titles. These are people that had absolutely nothing. And I laid my hands on one lady and tried to pray for her. Lord, whatever she needs, be with this lady. And here's what happened. That day changed my life because down on about the 3rd or the 4th lady, as I was trying to pray for them, I discovered I was not praying for them anymore, but instead I heard myself praying for me. I said, Lord, these little ladies, they love you. These ladies are in love with Jesus Christ, and I'm not sure that I really am. Lord, would you please just give me a little bit of what these ladies have? And I'm proud to tell you, happy to tell you today that He did. I came home, I got on the airplane and came back to Kentucky and discovered that I was a new man. I had begun to understand the love of God for the first time. Even though I met Him a long time ago, finally I was able to say that Jesus Christ was not just my judge who had declared me innocent, but He was my lover. A concept that I'm still trying to understand. So my questions for you this morning as we close are this. Jesus is saying, will you trust me? To some of you. Jesus is saying, will you follow me? For some of you. And for some of you, Jesus may be asking you to take the last step. Will you marry me? Do you want to be intimate with the God who created this universe? It's never too late. It's never too late. It's never too late. My last story is that I do a thing called drug court. It's for drug addicts. I meet with them every single week. And one of the drug addicts in my court was a man named Ben, 32 years old. And the staff people told me that Ben had cancer and that today would be the last day that I would ever see Ben. And so when Ben came into court, that last day, there was about 50 people there, lawyers, social workers, and the clients, the drug addicts, staff people. Ben came in. I said, Ben, I understand you have cancer. I was here up at the bench, and he was down in front of me. And I said, Ben, I've always been accused of praying for people in court, but it's not true. I've never prayed for anybody in court, ever. You're not supposed to do that, as you can imagine. I said, but this is your last day, and I don't care. I said, would you like me to pray for you right now? He smiled so big, looked at me and said, that'd be nice. I said, well, bow your head. And I bowed my head. And I was on a kick at that time. I had just memorized Psalm 23, and so I began to pray Psalm 23 over Ben Decker was his name. I had everybody in the courtroom bow their head. I was waiting for somebody to come arrest me, to be honest. It was a scary moment for me, maybe not Ben. I said, the Lord is Ben's shepherd. He shall not want. The Lord, even though he walks through the valley of the shadow of death, Ben will fear no evil. Let mercy and goodness follow Ben all the days of his life, and let him dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. I prayed like that for 5 minutes. When we opened our eyes, Ben was weeping. I was weeping. Everybody was weeping. And they never did arrest me. I got lucky on that one. But they told me the next day, Ben wanted me to speak at his funeral if he passed away. And so sure enough, I didn't even think about him for 10 months. I got the phone call. Ben's very sick now. He wants to see you. I went to see Ben. He had his hair back. His hair had disappeared, but his hair was back, and he looked actually more healthy than he was. The doctor had given him just a few weeks to live. And I met him at a little coffee shop, and we had the greatest conversation because he couldn't wait to see me, because he wanted to tell me that he'd been back to his grandfather's church and he'd put his trust in Jesus Christ, and he knew that heaven was waiting on him, and he knew that my prayer had mattered. And I said to him, Ben, that's fantastic. I said, Ben, who's your best friend, Ben? He said, oh, he looked at me and he says, oh, Judge. And I said, don't call me Judge. Just call me Tim. I used to be your judge. We're just friends now. He looked at me and he said, I said, so who's your best friend? He said, oh, you are. I said, Ben, I don't even know you. I prayed for you one time. I haven't seen you in 10 months. He said, no, Judge, you are. Because when you're a drug addict, you lose all your friends when you stop doing drugs. And so he was a completely changed man, and he began to tell me, he said, Judge, you know my mother. I said, who's your mother, Ben? He said, Win Decker. Win Decker was a Vietnamese lady, a lady from Vietnam. And 30 years before that, I had been her lawyer when she got a divorce. She had married a young man from Kentucky. They had a little boy named Benji. And I remembered, because I'd only had one client from Vietnam, I remembered her very well. I was the lawyer for this lady named Win Decker when she got a divorce, and her little boy named Benji was 2 years old. And now, 30 years later, Benji was my friend. I dedicated my book to all the children of irretrievably broken families. Ben Decker was one of those children. He lived as a drug addict mostly because he grew up in a very dysfunctional family, a dysfunctional home. But the good news is, it doesn't matter how big your sin is. It does not matter how great your sin is. It doesn't matter if you're a drug addict or what your problem is. Jesus Christ is great enough to save everybody, including Ben Decker. And I was at the hospital. His mother called me. We took the plugs out. Ben drifted off softly into heaven. I think he's hearing us right now. That was just a few months ago. And that same salvation that Ben received, even though he was a drug addict and a sinner, is available for everybody today. Lawyers, housewives, politicians, judges, business and professional people. It doesn't matter who you are. Jesus is asking you 3 questions. Will you trust me? Will you follow me? Will you marry me? Will you bow your heads with me? I'd like to say a final prayer and give you an opportunity to begin this journey with Jesus Christ. Some of you perhaps have trusted Him long ago. Some of you perhaps began to follow Him many years ago. But perhaps today is a day that you would ask Jesus Himself to be the love of your life. Perhaps you've got no relationship at all with God. Perhaps I'm talking about things that you've never thought much about. Today might be the day, May the 3rd, 2017, when your journey into eternity could begin. And it all begins with a simple prayer. I'm going to pray softly. I'm going to ask you to pray silently with me, if this would be the desire of your heart. Dear Lord, this morning, I thank you that you love me. And I believe that you sent Jesus Christ to this earth, and that He gave Himself for me. He died on a cross to pay the penalty for my sins. But I also believe that He is alive today, And I'm asking you to give me the life of Jesus Christ so that I can change. I'm asking you to forgive me for all of my sins. And on the basis of your love for me through Jesus Christ, I'm asking you today to give me eternal life. Today, I accept your offer to trust you. Today, I accept your offer to follow you. Today, I accept your offer to marry me, to be my love. I thank you for this opportunity to begin a new life. In Jesus Christ's name, amen. Amen. Thank you.